Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Politics Today as we discuss what are the state of Christian freedoms in the UK. And in this programme I'm joined by Tim Dieppe, a Director of Public Policy at Christian Concern, and Alistair Scott, UK Director for Vision for Israel. So welcome to the programme. Tim, great to see you back on Politics Today. And of course, every time you're on, just want to say how much of debt of gratitude we owe Christian Concern for the work that you do, Andrew and the rest of the team, in defending Christian freedoms in this country. So thank you so much. But in your opinion, where are we in terms of Christian freedoms in 2024 in this country?
So there's more and more, we get at Christian Concern more and more case inquiries every year, hundreds literally, of people calling us up saying, what do I do? I'm worried about my work, I'm worried about my children in the school, I'm worried about what I can teach, what I can't teach, whether I can refuse to teach this, what can I say, or what I have said at work, whatever, and how it might land me into trouble. We get hundreds, literally hundreds of case queries like that. You see the ones that end up getting into court, the ones you end up publicising, but there are many, many more below the surface, so to speak, like the tip of the iceberg of cases. And Christians are certainly feeling like they're under pressure, like people feel it's totally justified to discriminate against Christians in this country, and it's a very difficult time. And as we enter into the new year, the Scottish Government's brought out a consultation on banning so-called conversion practices, which poses potential new threats as well in terms of freedom of speech and what Christians and other people can say as well. So yes, we're concerned about the way things are going very much in this country in terms of Christian freedoms.
Yeah. Alistair, it's great you can join us on Politics Day, so it's great to see you. And you're very much involved in ministry, but have you seen the impact of what you say is really the state and our society against our faith and the practice of our faith within your confines of church work and ministry work?
I think without doubt there's restrictions more and more, and they're getting greater, as we've just heard from Tim, from at governmental level. But the interesting thing is I do a lot of work in the streets with people, and though you are walking on sort of eggshells a little bit, preaching the gospel out in the streets, having one-to-ones with people, you realize there's an openness in the hearts of the people, but the governmental restrictions of taking the gospel out are getting more and more tough in the church and outside of the church, because there are often you find people are planted in the church in order to be offended in and they can report that, and then the police can come in and take actions against you, even if it was something totally innocent. It does worry me, like Tim has just been saying, that most of the law seems to be against Christianity particularly. We seem to be the easiest target. They certainly wouldn't try to do the kind of restrictions that they do on Christianity if it was Islam or Hinduism or any of the other forms of religion. So we are concerned, but I mean, I always remind myself that our God is greater, and we do just need to pray into these things and make sure that we are bold enough, just like they were in the book of Acts, pray for more boldness to carry on beyond the restrictions that people are trying to put on us, because there is a harvest out there.
Absolutely, and of course we saw what Paul did during the time of the early church, causing riots in Ephesus and other places like that because he was preaching the gospel, but many got converted because of what he did. And Tim, where would you say the biggest threats and challenges to the practice of our faith are coming in the UK in 2024?
Well, as I mentioned, I think the Scottish proposal to ban conversion practices, so-called, is a threat. That's a real threat, and it's coming forward. They've proposed some laws there. It's quite draconian. There's no defence of consent. So this basically means they are deliberately intending to criminalise consensual conversations about certain things. That's quite alarming, isn't it? Quite scary. You can sign a consent form or whatever. You say, I definitely consent to this. I'm desperate to talk about this. And the government say, no, you can't consent to it. This is actually an illegal conversation. You can't talk about this. And I think that's very, very alarming that the Scottish government wants to bring that in like that, and no age restrictions as well, and so on. It's a very concerning proposal, and we will be certainly looking at how we can oppose that and advising people how we can respond to that consultation very shortly.
And also, Tim, what ideologies are we facing? Where do the threats from the ideology?
Yeah,
would you say the biggest threat to Christian freedoms in the UK are from those who advocate a position of multi-faith, those who support the kind of liberal progressive position, or secular humanists, or occultists? Where would you say the biggest threat from which ideological camp face the biggest threat to Christian
Well, in
freedoms?
terms of in Parliament, it's definitely the woke sort of liberal ideology that wants to sort of, extend, liberal laws and take down Christian morality and take down biblical morality in our courts and in our law system and so on. That's definitely the threat there, and the disrespect for Christianity from those guys is what's happening. Culturally, there are all the other things you mentioned are very much at play, and that's there. But in Parliament and in the judiciary and in the police and so on, it's very much the liberal, woke, cultural Marxist, for want of a better word, kind of approach that is dominating there and is causing people to, as you say, sort of single out Christians and single out Christianity for oppression, effectively.
And Alistair, how important is it that Christians get involved in politics and they are aware and really follow up to date some of the big frontline issues that Christian concern are facing to defend Christian freedoms in this country, and caring about this nation, caring about the issues that are affecting this nation, and also but praying for those in authority over us, particularly in Westminster and our government that produce the legislation that governs over us?
I think it's so important that you can't even begin to amplify how important it is. It's one of the biggest errors, I think, that have come through in recent Christianity, that being involved in politics and business and so on is some kind of thing that because we're at a higher level spiritually we shouldn't be involved. And yet, everything you read about in the Bible tells us that God wants the Christianity, the kingdom of God, the kingdom of light, to impact every part of society. I mean, our education, as Tim has just been sharing, our education system has been absolutely beaten up as far as Christianity goes. It's so hard to get in and do even an assembly in any school. Even the church schools tend to be very keep away. Certainly with politics, we need to be impacting politics. In the business realm, we've got to bring in the kingdom of light, the truth into those areas. So I would say to so many people who maybe think it's a lesser call, I tell you, it's not a lesser call. It's an important part of the calling of the Christian body to impact politics. There are a few politicians who are truly Christians. There's a few who would go to a church on a Sunday but not necessarily born again or understand the life of Christianity. And for us as believers and intercessors and people involved in ministry, come on, let's support our local MPs, but generally the cabinet. We need to be praying day and night as much as we can that we have righteousness, because the Bible tells us righteousness exalts a nation, and we're so far from righteousness in our government. I mean, every single day there seems to be an exposing of a story which just shows the selfishness, the self-seeking side of the government. And what the Bible actually tells us that those who govern us are supposed to care for the welfare of the people. I don't see that so often in any government, in any nation, but particularly, we're focusing on our own government. We need to shift back to the ways of the Christianity in our government. And people, I ask you, do pray for the leaders. It's part of 1 Timothy 2, not only for our spiritual leaders, but also for those who lead our nations. Pray for them. They need the guidance of the Holy Spirit.
Absolutely, that we may have peace. And Tim, just share with us how a big focal point of Christian freedoms in this country and to protect Christian freedoms is the sanctity of life. So share your concerns regarding the late last year 2 amendments were added to the proposed criminal justice bill, which would have a dramatic effect of decriminalising abortions right up to birth.
Yes, it's quite shocking, isn't it?
Very shocking.
The criminal justice bill is going through Parliament, and just before the end of November, before Christmas, before the recess, 2 amendments were proposed to that bill by Stella Creasy and Harriet Harman, and they would have the effect of decriminalising abortion, making it illegal, legalising carrying out abortion right up to birth. This would mean that a woman could obtain the abortion pills and take them right up to 39, 40 weeks and no sanction at all, and that's viewed as totally fine, even though that's again an incredible risk to both the woman and of course the baby as well. The drug companies themselves say it's not safe to take these pills beyond 10 weeks, and obviously there was the case of this lady Carla Foster who took pills at 32 weeks last year. And she admitted falsely obtaining them. She lied about her gestational age in order to do that, and took these pills and had a horrible abortion as a result, and was prosecuted for it. And rightly so. I mean, the courts can take a lenient aspect to the punishment, but this is wrong. You are killing your very viable baby. At that age, they're 95% viable. So it's very shocking. And at the moment, these amendments are in committee, as the committee is scrutinising the whole bill, and that will include these amendments. And then, depending if they get through, or one of them gets through perhaps, then it will come before Parliament and be voted on in Parliament. So we're encouraging people to write to their MPs and tell them about these amendments and tell them that they really should be opposed as much as possible. And it's quite shocking and quite demoralising and quite extreme, really, to think when other countries have lower limits for abortion than we have, that here we are in Parliament with people opposing just decriminalising it right up to birth.
And we have to ask as well, which is a very important question, how have the abortion lobby been able to jump on the bandwagon of the government's flagship legislation in terms of its justice legislation?
Well, it's parliamentary games, Simon. This is not what the Criminal Justice Bill is about at all. Abortion isn't mentioned anywhere else in the bill. It's got nothing to do with health issues either. They've just taken this opportunity to propose some amendments to it in order to have this effect. And they're jumping on the bandwagon. We've got two amendments there. One of them is even worse than the other one. One of them would decriminalise it also for the medics and the practitioners and all of that. The other one would just say the woman can't be prosecuted for it. Both of them would be radical changes to abortion law in this country. They brought them in at sort of the last minute before they could, before they go into committee. And we will see how it happens. We're very keen to raise up awareness of this and raise up support and get people writing to their MPs to complain about it and say, please, let's not do this. The fact is that public opinion does not support raising the gestational age limit for abortion. And public opinion actually, if anything, would go the other way and want to see the age limit reduced. So this is not something that's really supported by the public here. But it's quite shocking and alarming that it's been allowed to get through Parliament like this.
Wow. And if it wasn't for Christian Concern and Tim, I wouldn't know about this story. But just share with us how kind of vile the abortion lobby are to actually decriminalise women having almost abortions up until birth. So there isn't any deterrent through the law in actually doing so. So anyone can say, yeah, I just at the last minute, I don't want to have my baby and I'll abort my baby. So just share with us what kind of moral depths have we sunk to where we're actually allowing this to possibly take place in our country, and where's the moral outrage? Where's the outrage from the church regarding this, let alone in our kind of mainstream media? Because what kind of decency is this?
It's absolutely, as Tim just said, it's shocking, it's horrendous, it's worrying, terribly worrying. And for me, it astounds me how quickly things can change in government. Because I remember reading about this in one of the states in the USA where they were proclaiming and going for this change in the laws so that they could abort a child up to the day before. And in fact, I think they were even talking about after the child was born, you could still cause an abortion. I think that was in one of the states which are particularly liberal in USA. So I'd heard of this, and I remember it's not so long ago, maybe 3-6 months ago that I read this story, and I thought, well, I can't imagine that ever happening in England or in the UK. And here we are, just a few months later, and it's there. And like you say, really, as believers, as Christians, as Tim's just told us, we must write to our MPs and say, look, we do not agree with this. I remember having a talk with one of the ambassadors of Israel some time ago, and he had friends who were in the MPs and friends who were editors of newspapers, and he said, the reason that people don't go for what we ask them to do, because they've been to Israel, they've seen the situation, is because Christians and people do not write and do not challenge our MPs, but anyone from some of the other religions would. And in this situation, we really got to rise up and challenge every one of our MPs, wherever they are, and say, we do not believe in this. And as we've just been pointed out by Tim, even the polls tell us that generally the nation doesn't want this. But the church needs to rise up, awake, and start to be a little bit more vocal. I mean, it's one of these things we've seen. Our church leadership tends to be very quiet on anything that's controversial, probably for self-preservation, but that's not what the Bible tells us to be. It tells us not to be silent. And I'm so glad that Tim is here talking about this and making it available to people like yourself. You just said, you hadn't imagined, I didn't imagine this would happen in my lifetime, but things change so rapidly, and we just need to be challenging. We need to be speaking against those people who are proposing it. Where is it started from? It's obviously more to do a woman's choice than life, pro-life, and we need to get that pro-life argument back into our government, and the realization that that child is a human being just as much as I am, even if it's still in the womb. Therefore, it's precious in God's sight, as the Bible tells us. But it's a precious live being, a human being, and we need to preserve life and not try to take life in that inhuman way.
Absolutely. And Tim, just share with us the dangers for the mother involved in having an abortion up until the time of birth, and to decriminalise it. So effectively means that there is no deterrent. There is no kind of moral boundaries set anymore, particularly in law, particularly for the mother and also for the doctors and the medical staff.
Well, Simon, we know that 1 in 17 women who take these tablets within the prescribed, which is 10 weeks gestation, land up in hospital. That's about 6% of people who take them. It's way, way more than tablets you can get over the counter in a pharmacy or anything like that. You can just get these pills by phoning up and giving fake names, fake addresses, fake GP registrations, whatever. And so it's not safe even up to that 10-week limit as it is, right? And beyond there, even the manufacturers say it's not safe. Right, so the risk of hemorrhage and bleeding and that it's going wrong and requiring surgery and all of that kind of stuff is very, very high once you get beyond the 10-week limit. And so, the danger to the women themselves is actually really shocking and really disturbing, as well as to the poor baby as well.
Yeah. And Tim, also share with us how Christian freedom of speech is increasingly coming under threat now, and also the right to share the gospel in the public square and also in the streets of our major cities and towns, and also in the workplace in 2024.
Well, yes, we've got a number of cases like this, Simon. We've got a good news case, though, recently of a chap who won compensation from his employer. Andy Nix is a street preacher, likes to go out on the streets and preach the gospel, enjoys doing that, enjoys interacting with people and has a lot of fun preaching the gospel and sees people impacted by his preaching. One day he was unfortunate enough to get arrested by the police. He'd done nothing wrong. The police arrested him on charges of public order offence, whatever. And he was arrested and I think held in a cell for many hours before being discharged without charge. And so, there we are, no charge against him at all. But the school where he worked as an assistant found out that he'd been arrested for Christian street preaching. And as soon as they found out, he was called into headmaster's office and basically interrogated about it and said, well, our parents might not like your views some of our people might not agree with you on things. And he was summarily dismissed. Go and collect your things. You're not welcome back here ever again. Just like that, because he'd been accused of street preaching and because he'd been arrested without ever being charged for something. And in fact, he's pursuing the police for wrongful arrest, as it turns out. As well in this. So this is quite a shocking case. Now, he then, challenged that with the school, and we ended up helping him take it to court, and he won £7,000 of compensation from the school for, wrongful dismissal for that, as he should, because it was totally unjust and totally unfair. He'd done nothing wrong. He'd done nothing against the school at all. That was all he'd done. Has been, alleged, found to have been doing some preaching of the gospel. That was it. Now, that's not a justifiable ground for sacking someone. But the problem is that many people believe that this kind of thing is justifiable ground. Just having the views or being willing to share the views that there is such a thing as sin, that there is only one way to God, and these kind of things, actually is deemed so offensive in today's society that it's justifiable to sack you for that. Even saying that marriage between a man and a woman got Maureen Martin sacked, didn't it? And again, we got her compensation as well for this. We do have a good track record of getting compensation for these people, but the end goal has got to be that people stop getting sacked in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the thing. I think we've won something like £500,000 worth of compensation for clients in the last 12 months or so. And we keep winning cases because it is against the law to just sack people for these views. But society believes that they're justified in sacking Christians just for expressing their views. And that's the disturbing thing in terms of where we are at the moment, Simon.
Yeah. And Alistair, freedom of religion is one of the pillars of our democracy. It's an integral part of our democratic institutions that give this nation its precious freedom. It's also prescribed in the kind of Magna Carta as well. So share with us how once you start to erode Christian freedoms in this country, then the only way that this country and society can go down is a more dangerous authoritarian route, because believe it or not, Christian freedoms preserve our democracy, they preserve our freedom of speech, they preserve our freedom of assembly, and it's our Christian beliefs that have made this nation such a strong nation and society in history. So just share with us the danger of governments neglecting or coming against Christian freedoms, and the end result clearly is tyranny.
It's terribly dangerous, and that's why we need to be willing to fight. I mean, I talked about the Book of Acts earlier, when they actually were trying to shut them down, shut the message down, and they got together and prayed for more boldness to continue. Because I think if we shrink back, and again, Hebrews tells us not to shrink back from our faith and our beliefs, is if we start to just silence ourselves, we're losing ground. And there's no doubt if you start to slow down or shrink back, the government is going to enforce things on you beyond what they're doing even now. And it is a frightening thought that we're supposed to have freedom of expression. It's not like the case that Tim's just spoken to, that the man was going and enforcing somebody, you must hear what I've got to say and you must convert. He was just sharing on the streets what he believed, and we have those beliefs to express them with others. But I mean, as I said earlier, the problem is that there isn't a law to stop you preaching in the streets, and I do that. I take teams out from our church regularly into London to share the gospel in the streets, and even preaching out loud where the opportunities are. And there's no real law against it, but very often you're challenged, and I've seen this happen with one or two street preachers who've been arrested and taken in, and then they find there isn't, because they quote laws which don't exist, and if you don't realize what the law really says, you give in, or maybe you back off or whatever. So we need to challenge everything that is trying to slow us down, to silence us, because that's not the plan of God for our lives.
Absolutely. And Tim, how do we protect other teachers going through this? Because this seems to be more of a problem pretty much in the public sector, where we see government-controlled jobs, and this rather than more so with the private sector. So just share with us those Christians who have jobs working for the government are the ones that are being affected the most in terms of what they can say in the workplace, what they can't say, and how they are effectively being discriminated against.
Well, I think that's true, and in fact a disproportionate number of our cases are in particular teachers or people in relation to schools who have been prosecuted or but lost their jobs for expressing their views about sex education or other related issues and so on. I mean, a bit of encouragement, Simon, is the new transgender guidance for schools that came out earlier this year. Again, there's a consultation. Again, we'll be providing guidance for people to respond to that. But it basically is quite strong and says that you should be free to call someone by their biological sex and stuff, and refer to people like that, and schools do not have to allow transition and all of this kind of stuff. So that's encouraging in that. But and obviously we've had cases where people have lost their jobs over this kind of thing. But it is a real problem, and the Church of England is also a problem in this. Sadly, their own guidance, valuing all God's children for their own schools, has been used against Christians in court in this whole area, which is quite shocking. So yes, teaching is very much at the front line of this whole area. and teachers are feeling very much under pressure about what they can say and what they can't say, and it's a real issue, and really need to pray into it and get involved in your local school and write to your governors and stand up for Christian principles and freedoms in your local school if you can.
Absolutely. And Alistair, sadly we are living in very dark and dangerous times. So how important is it that we represent Christ wherever we are in the workplace, and don't be ashamed of the gospel, but be bold in the confidence that God is sovereign and he's in control, even if we suffer persecution, because of course him and all the early church leaders and the apostles were all executed by one.
Yeah, well, I mean, John. It's all there in the Bible, in our foundations of our teaching. You know, Matthew 5 tells us to be salt and light. You know, that's the flavour of heaven, and light in the darkest times. Therefore, it's so important for us to continue to take opportunities without being over forceful, without enforcing something, but sharing the gospel so people. As I said earlier, people need the choice, and that's my life, is just to give somebody a choice. You can follow this way, or you can choose another way. But I find in my personal life, when I was confronted with something, I couldn't get it out of my system, and I was wondering, why have I got so angry about something which is not so important? But there you go.
Absolutely. And within 30 seconds, Tim, just share with us how we need to make the issue of Christian freedoms an important issue in the general election.
Yes, well, I think it will be. I think parliamentarians need to be held to account. We'll be bringing out a guide of questions to ask candidates that relate to all of these various issues in Christian freedoms, and we look forward to bringing that battle out into the election, into politics, the political arena.
Excellent. So, Tim, Alistair, thank you so much for being my guests on this week's Politics Today. And I want to thank you for watching this programme at home. We can't no longer afford to take our Christian freedoms for granted. We've got to fight for them. And we've got to pray for our government and our leaders. And we've got to support organisations like Christian Concern who are defending Christians and defending Christian freedoms in this country, because if we don't fight, we'll lose them. And once we lose them, we're heading down a very dangerous authoritarian route, and no one wants that. So thank you for watching this week's edition of Politics Today.